Ethan Caldwell, 38, was a respected civil engineer known for his sharp mind and strong ethics. He had built bridges all across the state, but none more meaningful than the life he constructed with his wife, Laura.
Laura Caldwell, 35, was a high school English teacher. Intelligent, warm, the kind of woman who left a mark wherever she went. Together they seemed like the perfect couple. Married for 12 years, living in a modest but lovely two-story home in Oregon, they had no children. Had tried for years to have a child. Fertility treatments, IVF. Nothing worked. The grief of that unspoken absence had eaten away at them quietly. Every morning they had coffee together. Every night they watched reruns of The Office and laughed like it was the first time. But under the surface, Laura was restless. The predictability of their life bored her, and that restlessness would soon become a weapon. It was in early spring when Ethan got the call. His younger brother, Aiden Caldwell, 33, was in trouble. Aiden had always been the opposite of Ethan, a charming, impulsive bartender who drifted from job to job, woman to woman, city to city. But this time, the trouble was bigger. A bad breakup, job loss, mounting debts, and no place to go. Ethan didn't hesitate. Blood was blood. He offered Aiden the guest room, just until he got back on his feet. Laura raised an eyebrow, but smiled. "Of course," she said. "What's family for?" Aiden moved in with a duffel bag, a pack of cigarettes, and a grin that could melt ice. He was charismatic, funny, the kind of man who could light up a room. Laura noticed. How could she not? Aiden would help Laura with packing away groceries, cooking, laughing at her jokes. At first it was harmless, flirty banter, lingering looks, late-night wine after Ethan went to bed. But soon, harmless became dangerous. The tension between them crackled like dry leaves on fire. 3 weeks in, that's all it took. One rainy night, Laura knocked on Aiden's door with a bottle of bourbon and a story about a fight with Ethan over the phone about his recent work schedule. "He is working later than usual," she complained. "I think he is cheating." It started as a shoulder to cry on. It ended in the guest room bed. They told themselves it was a mistake, but it wasn't. It became a routine. Ethan would leave for his early morning site visits. Laura and Aiden would stay behind. And, behind the curtains, betrayal bloomed like rot. Ethan wasn't blind. At first, it was just a feeling, that sixth sense that something was wrong. Laura had become distant, cold. Her phone, once left on the kitchen counter, now lived in her pocket. Aiden, once grateful and friendly, was now defensive, quick to retreat behind a closed door. He noticed how Aiden's shoes weren't by the guest room door some mornings, how Laura wore perfume again, but only on weekdays, how she was glued to her phone when she thought Ethan wasn't looking. One day he came home early, having forgotten an important file, and what he walked in on confirmed his darkest fears. Door opening abruptly. Sudden silence. Aiden quickly stepping back from Laura. They weren't doing anything, but their guilt hung in the air like smoke. They looked startled, flushed. Laura's blouse slightly undone. Aiden's belt half-looped. Ethan said nothing, just stared, then left without a word. Ethan needed proof. As much as it tore him apart, he had to know the truth. He bought a hidden camera, one small enough to fit in the smoke detector above the hallway. He placed it himself while Laura was out running errands. Ticking clock, a laptop opening, Ethan reviewing footage in a dark hotel room. 3 days later, he found it. Footage of Laura slipping into the guest room, Aiden locking the door behind her, their silhouettes against the window pane, laughter, kissing, clothes tossed aside. He watched it all in silence, tears running down his face, not from rage, but heartbreak. I gave him a home. I gave her everything. He didn't confront them right away. He let the knowledge fester. He wanted to see how far they'd go. And they kept going, blissfully unaware that every second was being recorded. Ethan waited for the perfect moment. A Sunday night dinner, the kind they used to have before everything changed. Roast chicken, red wine. He lit candles just like the old days. Laura was uneasy, but she didn't say anything. Aiden looked tense. "Ethan, let's talk." They sat across from him like students facing the principal. Ethan opened his laptop and pressed play. The video began,
Grainy, but clear. Laura gasped. Aiden's fork dropped. Laura, shaking. Ethan, I can explain. Ethan, voice firm. Don't. Just tell me how long. They didn't answer. Didn't need to. Ethan looked at them with dead eyes, then slid a small box across the table. Ethan, take it. That's all your stuff. Aiden, you have until tomorrow to leave. Laura, I'll call a lawyer. And with that, he left the table. And the life he had built for 12 years, Ethan checked into a local extended stay motel. No frills, just a bed, a desk, and silence. He stopped going into work. Called in sick. His colleagues thought it was stress. They had no idea. Ethan staring blankly at a wall. Unshaven. Days turning into nights. Laura tried to reach him. She left voicemails, long emails, tearful texts. She said it was a mistake, that she loved him, that it didn't mean anything. But Ethan said nothing. The silence became her punishment. Aiden was gone within the week. No goodbye, no forwarding address, just vanished. Laura was left in the empty house. The rooms echoed with regret. 4 weeks passed. Ethan was a ghost of himself. One night he sat at his desk with a bottle of scotch and wrote Laura a final letter. Then he drove back to the house just before midnight. Car pulling into a driveway, keys turning in a lock, soft footsteps. Laura was asleep on the couch. When she saw him, she bolted upright. Laura, Ethan? What are you doing here? He said nothing, just handed her a large envelope. Inside was a divorce agreement. Everything divided, no lawyers, just signatures. Laura, crying. Please, don't do this. I made a mistake. I was lost. We can fix this. Please. I still love you. But Ethan didn't respond. He turned to leave, then stopped. A storm had begun outside. Lightning flashed across the kitchen. He turned back. No one knows what exactly happened in that moment, whether it was months of betrayal crashing down on him or something she said, but something inside him snapped. Ethan, shouting, you destroyed me. You let him in our bed. You lied to my face. Laura, screaming, it was a mistake. I was lonely. You were never there anymore. There was a struggle. A glass shattered. A heavy skillet clattered to the floor. And then, silence. One dull, sickening thud. Then dripping water. Then silence. When the police arrived, called by a neighbor who heard screaming, they found Ethan sitting on the kitchen floor, cradling Laura's lifeless body. Blood pooled around her head. His hands were shaking, smeared in blood. What officers found inside was quiet and chilling. Laura was on the kitchen floor, a crimson pool beneath her head. The knife, an 8-inch chef's blade, still gripped loosely in her hand as if she tried to defend herself. Ethan sat on the kitchen bench, hands soaked in blood, eyes hollow like he was already somewhere else. Sir, can you hear me? Step away from the body. Sir, put your hands up. Ethan didn't resist. He stood up slowly, hands raised, and then he spoke. Ethan, calmly, with a voice that sent chills down the responding officers' spines. She was cheating on me, with my brother. I loved her, and she broke everything inside me. I didn't come in here planning this. But when I remember those video footage of them together, when I saw her laugh like that, like I didn't even exist, something in me just snapped. He didn't run, didn't lie, didn't even try to explain further, just repeated those same words, loved her, and she broke everything inside me. The police read him his rights. He nodded, said nothing more. Outside, neighbors gathered in their pajamas and robes, whispering. Inside, a love triangle had collapsed into blood. The trial lasted 6 days. Ethan pled guilty to second-degree murder. No contest, no witnesses called. He refused to defend himself. The prosecutor painted him as a man driven mad by betrayal. The defense called it a crime of passion. But Ethan said little, just one statement before sentencing. Ethan, softly. I gave her everything. The judge sentenced him to 25 years with no parole. No one from Laura's family attended.
Aiden was never found. Ethan now lives in Oregon State Penitentiary. He works in the library, speaks to no one. His cell is lined with engineering textbooks, the same ones he once used to build bridges.
Aiden disappeared without a trace. Rumors say he moved to Texas. Others say he changed his name. No one knows for sure. Some believe the guilt consumed him.
Others believe he never felt it to begin with. The house was sold. A new family moved in. Laura was buried in a modest plot under a cherry tree. Her tombstone reads, "Beloved daughter, lost too soon." But what it should have said was, a victim of her own choices, of a love triangle that became a noose. In prison, Ethan found structure, but not peace. He woke at 5 a.m., worked in the prison library cataloging books, and read until lights out. He didn't fight, didn't argue, didn't speak unless spoken to. It was as though a part of him had died with Laura, and the rest was just serving time. He never spoke of the murder, never talked about Aiden, not once. The other inmates called him the ghost, not for what he did, but for the way he lived after it.
Aiden became a phantom. After the news of Laura's murder hit the local headlines, he vanished. No forwarding address. His bank accounts were drained.
Social media deleted. It was as if he never existed.
Some said he fled to Mexico. Others whispered that he changed his name and started a new life in Canada. But the truth? No one knows. His parents, the few friends he had left, refused to speak of him. He was erased, by shame or fear, or both.
The brothers' parents, Eleanor and George, were devastated. One son in prison, the other missing, a daughter-in-law dead, their family tree cut at the root.
They stopped speaking to Ethan after the sentencing. George fell ill a year later and died from brain cancer. Eleanor now lives alone, never mentioning their names. The silence became her only survival.
The house, once a home filled with laughter, late-night takeouts, and dreams, sat on the market for months. Potential buyers always walked away after the tour. Some said the air inside felt heavy. Others said they heard things.
Eventually, it was bought by a young couple who didn't know the story, but neighbors still whisper when they walk by. They say the kitchen lights flicker at night, that sometimes they hear footsteps pacing, and a woman crying.
Every year on their anniversary, Ethan writes a letter to Laura. He never sends it. He just writes it, folds it, and leaves it on the corner of his prison desk. Ethan wrote, April 7th. We would have been 15 years today. I still remember your laugh. I still hate you for what you did. But some nights, I still miss you. I think I always will. He burns the letter in a tin tray before lights out. Ashes to ashes.
This story isn't just about infidelity. It's not just about murder. It's about the things people don't say until it's too late. The fractures that form in silence, the hunger for love, and the cost of betrayal. If Aiden had stayed away, if Laura had spoken up, if Ethan had just walked away, maybe this story would have ended differently. But in the end, 3 lives were destroyed by a single truth. That love, when built on lies, is just a ticking bomb. Betrayal can cost a marriage, but sometimes it costs a life.